At my daughter's wedding, her husband tripped me, and I fell to the floor. "Your place is at my feet, old man," he exclaimed mockingly, causing the guests to burst into laughter. I felt humiliated, but he was interrupted by his father's shocked voice. "Sir, is that you?" That moment turned his world upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The front door burst open with enough force to rattle the hinges. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips as Faye practically flew into the living room, her coat trailing behind her like wings. "Dad, Mom, I have the most incredible news." She dropped her purse with a thud that made Edith look up from folding laundry. The evening news droned on about traffic delays, but all I could focus on was my daughter's flushed face and wild eyes. Something electric buzzed in the air around her. "What's gotten into you, sweetheart?" I set my mug down carefully on the side table, the ceramic making a soft clink against the wood. Faye threw herself onto the couch next to her mother, bouncing like a teenager instead of the 28-year-old marketing professional she was. "Glenn proposed." She thrust her left hand forward, and a diamond caught the lamplight, throwing tiny rainbows across the coffee table. The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats. I felt my chest tighten, the familiar weight that settled there whenever something threatened our family's peace. "That's wonderful, honey." Edith's voice carried the careful tone she used when she was buying time to think. She took Faye's hand, examining the ring with practiced enthusiasm. "It's beautiful." I forced my face into what I hoped looked like a smile. "This is sudden, sweetheart. How long have you two been discussing marriage?" Faye's laugh bubbled up like champagne overflowing. "We haven't been discussing it, Dad. When you know, you know. Glenn said he knew the moment he met me that I was the one." She pulled her hands free and started pacing, her energy too big for our quiet living room. "When's the wedding?" The question came out flatter than I intended. "Next month, May 15th. I know it sounds crazy, but we don't want to wait. Life's too short to play it safe all the time." Next month, 4 weeks to plan a wedding, 4 weeks to figure out who this Glenn Ortiz really was and why every instinct I had screamed warnings whenever Faye mentioned his name. "Honey, that's very fast." Edith folded the towel in her hands with more precision than necessary. "Are you sure you wouldn't want more time to plan something special?" "Mom, we want something intimate, small, just family and close friends." Faye stopped pacing and grabbed both our hands, her diamond pressing cold against my palm. "I need you both to be happy for me. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." Her eyes shined with unshed tears of joy, and my heart cracked a little. When had my little girl grown up enough to make decisions this big? When had I stopped being the man she came to for advice? "Of course we're happy for you." I squeezed her hand, the lie sitting heavy on my tongue. "We just want to make sure you're making the right choice." "I am, Dad. Glenn's amazing. He's successful. He's got his own construction business, and he treats me like a queen." She released our hands and started gathering her things. "I need to call Sarah and tell her she's going to be my maid of honor, and I have to book the venue tomorrow morning." She kissed both our cheeks in a whirlwind of perfume and excitement, then headed for the door. "Oh, and we're meeting for dinner Thursday night at Luigi's. Glenn wants to get to know you both better." The door closed behind her with a decisive click, leaving Edith and me staring at each other across the suddenly quiet room. Through the lace curtains, I watched her car disappear into the spring evening, taillights blinking like warning signals. My hands were still shaking when I reached for my coffee. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times as I checked the front door lock for the second time tonight. Old habits from 40 years of factory work died hard. Secure the perimeter, make sure everyone's safe before rest. Edith was already in our bedroom, sitting on her side of the bed in her nightgown, carefully placing her earrings in the small ceramic dish I'd bought her for our 20th anniversary. The ritual of our evenings had become as comfortable as breathing, but tonight felt different, heavy. I couldn't stop moving. 3 steps to the dresser, turn, 5 steps to the window, turn again. The floorboards creaked under my restless pacing, marking time like a metronome. "Wally, you're going to wear a path in that carpet." Edith's voice carried the gentle exasperation of a woman who'd been married to a worrier for 4 decades. "Something's wrong with him, Edith." I stopped at the foot of our bed, hands running through what was left of my hair. I feel it in my gut, the way she talks about him, the rush to marry. It's not right. She pulled back the covers with deliberate calm. "Give them a chance, sweetheart. remember how my father felt about you when we first started dating? That was different. Was it? She patted the mattress beside her. Come sit down. Your pacing is making me dizzy. I perched on the edge of the bed, my weight making the springs creak softly. Your father had legitimate concerns. I was 19, working in a factory, no college education. And you turned out to be exactly what I needed. Her hand found mine in the dim light, filtering through our bedroom curtains. Maybe Glenn will surprise you. He's keeping her from us, Edith. Notice how we've barely met him? A few minutes here and there, always rushing off somewhere. What kind of man doesn't want to spend time with his future in-laws? She was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. Faye's always been impulsive. Remember when she wanted to quit college junior year to become a dancer? This isn't the same as a career change. I stood up again, the need to move too strong to ignore. This is marriage. This is forever. And we don't know anything about him except what she tells us. Which is that he makes her happy. Does he? Or does she just think he does? The question hung between us like smoke. Edith sighed and slipped under the covers. What do you want to do, Wallace? Forbid her from marrying him? She's 28 years old. I want to understand why my daughter is rushing into marriage with someone we barely know. I finally gave in and sat back down, the mattress dipping under my weight. I want to know why she won't listen when we ask reasonable questions. Because she's in love, and people in love don't always make sensible choices. I thought about Thursday night's dinner, about sitting across from Glenn Ortiz and trying to read the man behind my daughter's starry-eyed descriptions. Maybe Edith was right. Maybe I was borrowing trouble. But as I lay in the dark listening to my wife's breathing even out into sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would test every instinct I'd developed in 68 years of living. The red numbers on the alarm clock glowed 11:47 when I finally closed my eyes. 3 days later, I was wishing I'd trusted that instinct from the start. Luigi's buzzed with the comfortable chaos of a Thursday night dinner crowd. Red checkered tablecloths, wine bottles converted to candle holders, and the rich smell of garlic and oregano should have made for a pleasant family meal. Should have. Glenn was already at the table when we arrived, his expensive watch catching the candlelight, as he gestured broadly to the waitress. Even sitting down, his presence dominated the corner booth Faye had reserved. Dad, Mom, this is Glenn. Faye's voice sparkled with pride as she made the introductions, her engagement ring flashing as she gestures between us. He stood with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His handshake was firm, the kind designed to establish dominance rather than warmth. Mr. and Mrs. Marshall, great to finally sit down together. His smile was perfect, practiced. Faye's told me so much about you both. We settled into our seats, the small talk flowing like oil over water. Glenn ordered wine without asking what we preferred. He recommended dishes as if he owned the restaurant. Every comment seemed calculated to demonstrate his sophistication, his success, his complete control of the situation. So Glenn, I said, studying the menu to avoid looking directly at him. Faye mentioned you're in construction. Commercial development, actually. Just closed a deal on a strip mall in Naperville. $23 million. He leaned back in his chair, arms spread across the booth like he was claiming territory. The number hung in the air, impressive and intimidating in equal measure. I glanced at Edith, who was making polite conversation about the wedding plans, her social skills smoothing over the rough edges I felt, scraping against my nerves. That's quite an accomplishment for someone your age, I said. Glenn's laugh was sharp, cutting through the restaurant noise. Age is just a number, Wallace. It's about vision, about taking risks when other people are too scared to act. The dismissal in his voice made my jaw tighten. Faye giggled, oblivious to the undercurrent, her attention focused on Glenn like he was the only person at the table worth listening to. Speaking of age, Glenn continued, swirling his wine glass with practiced casualness. You know what? Maybe we should seat Dad in another room, so this boring guy doesn't ruin the young people's fun. The words hit like a physical blow. The restaurant noise faded to a dull roar as blood rushed to my face. I felt Edith's warning touch on my arm, her fingers pressing gently against my sleeve. That was a joke, right? My voice came out rougher than I intended. Glenn's grin widened, showing perfect teeth. Of course, Pops. Where's your sense of humor? Faye laughed again, the sound scraping against my ears like fingernails on a chalkboard. Glenn, you're terrible. Don't mind him, Dad. He loves to tease. But I saw something else in Glenn's eyes, a cold calculation that had nothing to do with humor. He was testing me, pushing boundaries to see how far he could go, how much disrespect I'd swallow for my daughter's sake. My hands clenched into fists under the table, knuckles pressing against the rough fabric of my pants. 43 years of marriage had taught me to read Edith's signals, and her gentle pressure on my arm screamed caution. I forced my mouth into what might have passed for a smile. Just making sure we're all on the same page here. Always am, Wallace. Always am. Glenn raised his wine glass in a mock toast, and the candlelight turned his smile predatory. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and careful politeness. But the damage was done. The line had been drawn, and we both knew exactly where we stood. When we finally escaped to the parking lot, the April air felt thin after the restaurant's oppressive warmth. I fumbled with the car keys, my hands still trembling from suppressed rage. My fingers slipped against the metal keys twice before I managed to unlock our sedan. The streetlights cast harsh shadows across the parking lot, making everything look sharp and unfriendly. "Did you hear what he said?" The words exploded out of me the moment we were sealed inside the car. "Boring! He called me boring!" Edith clicked her seatbelt with deliberate precision, her purse clutched tight in her lap like armor. "It's youth, dear. Remember yourself at 30. "I would never have dared say that to your father." I jammed the key into the ignition with more force than necessary. Never, not even as a joke. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, but nothing felt normal tonight. Even the route home seemed different, the traffic lights casting red and green patterns across Edith's worried face. "Your father respected me eventually," she said quietly, adjusting the rearview mirror so she could watch my expression. "These things take time." "Time?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter as we stopped at Michigan Avenue. "He disrespected me in front of our daughter, in public, and you think time will fix this?" A horn honked behind us as the light turned green. I jerked the car forward, my driving more aggressive than usual, taking turns sharper than Edith liked. "Wallace!" Her voice carried the tone she used when my blood pressure spiked. "You're scaring me." That stopped me cold. I eased off the accelerator, flexed my fingers against the steering wheel. "I'm sorry. It's just... I know." She reached over and touched my shoulder, then withdrew when I didn't respond. "But what can we do? She loves him." "She thinks she loves him?" We passed a group of young people laughing outside a bar, their carefree energy mocking the tension suffocating our car. "There's a difference." "Is there? How can you be so sure?" I wanted to explain about the coldness I'd seen in Glenn's eyes, about the calculated way he'd delivered that insult, about how every instinct I'd developed in 68 years screamed danger. Instead, I just drove. The familiar streets of our neighborhood appeared through the windshield, like old friends offering comfort. Tree-lined sidewalks, houses with warm lights in the windows, the predictable geography of a life well lived. "Maybe I'm wrong," I said as we pulled into our driveway. "Maybe he'll grow up, learn some manners." But even as I said it, turning off the headlights and sitting in the sudden darkness, I knew I was lying. Men like Glenn didn't change. They just got better at hiding what they really were. Edith's hand found mine in the darkness between our seats. "Come inside, dear. Let's just forget about tonight." I sat there for another moment, engine ticking as it cooled, our house waiting patiently for us to come home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that home wasn't going to be safe much longer. 4 days crawled by like wounded animals. I found myself checking the locks twice each night, watching the street through our lace curtains whenever a car passed too slowly. Edith pretended not to notice, but I caught her watching me with the careful attention she usually reserved for my blood pressure medication. Thursday evening found us in our usual positions, me in the recliner with the newspaper folded to the crossword, Edith on the couch mending a tear in one of my work shirts. The evening news droned about city budget problems, familiar white noise in our quiet living room. When the phone rang at 8:45, I expected Faye calling about flower arrangements or wedding invitations. Instead, a voice I'd heard only twice before cut through the peaceful evening like a blade. "Listen here, old man," Glenn's words slurred together, sharper than they'd been at the restaurant. "Don't you dare ruin my wedding with your outdated, narrow-minded views." I sat up straighter, the newspaper sliding to the floor. What do you think you're— Shut up and listen! His voice rose, and I could hear background noise, music, laughter, the clink of glasses. I know what you've been telling Faye about me, poisoning her mind against the man she loves. I haven't said anything to Faye. My hand tightened on the receiver. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? Glenn's laugh was ugly, nothing like the practiced charm he'd shown at dinner. I'll tell you what's wrong, Pops. You think you can intimidate me with your disapproving looks and your silent judgment. Well, here's some news. I don't intimidate easily. I glanced toward the living room, where Edith had muted the television and was watching me with growing alarm. Her knitting had fallen to her lap, forgotten. Keep your nose out of our business, Wallace, or you'll regret it. I promise you that. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. The malice in his voice made my blood run cold. Stay away from my wedding. Stay away from my wife. Stay away from my life, or I'll make yours very unpleasant. The line went dead with a sharp click that echoed in my ear like a gunshot. I stared at the receiver, my hand trembling as Glenn's words replayed in my mind. 43 years of marriage had taught Edith to read my face like a map. She was already rising from the couch, her bare feet silent on the carpet as she moved toward me. Wallace? Her voice was barely above a whisper. What's wrong? I set the phone back in its cradle with exaggerated care, as if it might explode if handled roughly. My legs felt suddenly weak, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself as I walked back toward the living room. The familiar space, our haven of 40 years, felt different now. Violated, the comfortable chairs, the family photos on the mantel, the soft lamplight that had always meant safety. All of it seemed fragile as tissue paper. Edith's knitting scattered across the hardwood floor as she rushed toward me, her bare feet making soft padding sounds. I must have looked as shaken as I felt because she grabbed my arm before I could even speak. Sit down, she said, guiding me to my chair with the same gentle firmness she'd used when I'd thrown out my back 3 winters ago. You're white as a sheet. I sank into the familiar leather, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through my system. He threatened me, Edith. My own future son-in-law threatened me over the telephone. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water, pressing it into my shaking hands. Who threatened you? Glenn? He was drunk. Had to be. I took a sip, the cool water helping steady my voice. Called me an old man, told me to stay away from his wedding, his wife, his life. Edith lowered herself onto the arm of my chair, her hand finding my forehead like she was checking for fever. What exactly did he say? That he'd make my life unpleasant if I didn't keep my nose out of his business. The words tasted bitter. Said I was poisoning Faye's mind with my narrow views. Maybe he was just— People say stupid things when they drink, Wallace. You know that. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. This wasn't the reaction of someone who believed her own words. This wasn't stupid drunk talk, Edith. This was calculated, mean. I set the water glass down on the side table with a soft clink. He wanted to scare me. Did he succeed? The question hung between us in the soft lamplight. On the muted television, a commercial played silently. Cheerful families selling breakfast cereal to an audience that couldn't hear their joy. Yes, I admitted. Not for me, but for Faye. What kind of man threatens his future father-in-law? What's he going to do to her when she disappoints him? Edith's hand tightened on my shoulder. Maybe we should tell her. Tell her what? That her Prince Charming called me up drunk and made threats? She'll think I'm trying to sabotage her happiness. Then what do we do? I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, feeling every one of my 68 years settling into my bones. Through the window, I could hear the Hendersons' dog barking at something in their backyard, probably a raccoon. Normal suburban evening sounds that felt impossibly distant now. I don't know, I whispered. We sat there in the blue glow of the muted television, both lost in our own thoughts, while somewhere across town, our daughter planned a wedding to a man who'd just shown us exactly who he really was. The alarm clock was still an hour away when I opened my eyes to the gray light filtering through our bedroom curtains. May 15th. The wedding day I'd been dreading for 23 days. My wedding suit hung on the closet door like a dark sentinel, pressed and ready. Edith had insisted on the navy blue instead of black. More festive, she'd said. More appropriate for celebrating our daughter's happiness. 23 nights of broken sleep had taught me there was no point lying in bed, once consciousness returned. I slipped out from under the covers, careful not to wake Edith, though her breathing told me she wasn't really sleeping either. The shower water ran hotter than necessary, steam fogging the bathroom mirror until I couldn't see my reflection. Good. I wasn't ready to look at myself yet, to see what 3 weeks of carrying Glenn's threats had done to my face. When I finally emerged, towel wrapped around my waist, Edith was sitting up in bed, watching me with the careful attention she'd developed lately. "Big day," she said softly. "Yes." I reached for my razor, tested the blade against my thumb. One way or another. She didn't ask what I meant. After 43 years of marriage, some conversations happened in the spaces between words. The ritual of dressing felt like armor preparation. Undershirt first, then the crisp white dress shirt Edith had starched to military precision. The navy suit pants, carefully creased, each piece of clothing a shield against whatever the day might bring. "Let me." Edith appeared beside me as I struggled with the cufflinks, small silver rectangles that had belonged to my father. Her fingers were steadier than mine, sliding the links through the French cuffs with practiced ease. "There." She smoothed the collar, adjusted the shoulders. "You look wonderful, dear." I caught sight of myself in the dresser mirror, a 68-year-old man in his finest clothes, trying to look dignified for his daughter's wedding. My father's face stared back at me, weathered by decades of factory work and family responsibility. "I hope this day passes without incidents," I said, reaching for the cologne bottle I saved for special occasions. "It will." Edith's voice carried the forced optimism she'd been wearing like makeup for weeks. "This is Faye's day. Everything will be perfect." From downstairs came the smell of bacon and coffee, her attempt to make the morning feel normal, despite the tension that had been strangling our house since Glenn's phone call. Neither of us had mentioned that night directly, but it lived between us like a third presence at every meal, every conversation. I slipped the wedding gift into my jacket pocket, a silver picture frame engraved with their names and wedding date, something beautiful to mark what should have been the happiest day of our daughter's life. "Ready?" Edith asked, smoothing my tie one final time. I picked up my car keys from the dresser, feeling their familiar weight. "Let's go make our daughter happy." But as we walked toward the garage together, my formal shoes clicking against the hardwood floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that happiness was about to become very expensive indeed. The garage door rumbled open to reveal perfect spring weather, the kind of day that makes photographers weep with joy and fathers of the bride check their watches obsessively. I backed our sedan out carefully, mindful of Edith's formal dress and my own press suit. "GPS says 45 minutes to the hotel," Edith announced, adjusting the rearview mirror so she could check her lipstick. With Saturday traffic, we should arrive right on time. Classical music drifted from the radio, something soothing she'd selected to calm my nerves. It wasn't working. My hands gripped the steering wheel like I was holding on to the edge of a cliff. The familiar streets of our neighborhood gave way to busier arteries leading downtown. Other cars carried other families dressed in their finest. Wedding guests, graduation attendees, people celebrating life's milestones without the weight of dread sitting on their chests like concrete blocks. "Remember the Hendersons' wedding last summer?" Edith's voice carried the gentle cheerfulness she'd perfected during our weeks of not talking about Glenn. "How beautiful Sarah looked in her grandmother's dress." I checked the mirrors again, merged carefully into the left lane. Every movement felt deliberate, calculated to avoid any surprise or disruption that might upset the delicate balance we'd maintained. "Faye's dress is even more stunning. Did you see the final alterations? The way the lace catches the light?" She paused, recognizing my distraction. "Wallace, everything will be fine. This is our daughter's day." "Yes, you're right." The words came out automatically, a response I'd rehearsed. "For Faye's sake, I'll endure anything." Lakeshore Drive stretched ahead, the hotel rising like a glass monument against the azure sky. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms directed traffic, their professional smiles welcoming guests to what was undoubtedly the most expensive day of Glenn's life. "Look at all these cars," Edith murmured, craning her neck to see the parking situation. "Mercedes, BMWs. Glenn certainly has successful friends. Or friends who want to appear successful," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I followed the hand signals of a young man in a bow tie, easing our modest sedan between a Lexus and an Escalade. The valet approached with practiced efficiency, his name tag reading Marcus in gold script. "Good afternoon, sir. Here for the Ortiz-Marshall wedding?" "Yes." I handed him the keys, noting how he managed not to wince at our car's age. "The reception is in the grand ballroom?" "Second floor, sir. The elevators are straight through the lobby." Edith gathered her small purse and the wrapped gift we'd chosen together. A silver tea service that had taken 2 weeks to select and personalize. I straightened my tie, checked my jacket pocket for the smaller gift I'd chosen privately. Through the hotel's glass doors came the sound of laughter and music, the celebration already in full swing. Guests in expensive clothing moved through the lobby like colorful fish in an aquarium, their voices creating a bubble of joy and anticipation. I offered Edith my arm, feeling the familiar comfort of her hand tucking into the crook of my elbow. "Ready, dear? Ready?" But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We walked toward those glass doors together, toward the sound of our daughter's happiness and whatever price Glenn Ortiz intended to extract for allowing us to share it. 9 o'clock found the reception in full swing, the grand ballroom alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and a DJ who understood exactly how to keep 3 generations dancing. I'd made it through the ceremony without incident, through dinner and speeches with my dignity intact. Glenn had been drinking steadily since the cocktail hour, his voice growing louder with each toast, his gestures more expansive as he held court near the open bar. His friends, young men in expensive suits with the swagger of inherited wealth, encouraged his performance like spectators at a gladiator fight. I'd been careful to stay inconspicuous, keeping to our family table near the windows, making polite conversation with Edith's sister and her husband. Faye glowed as she danced with her new husband, her wedding dress flowing like cream silk, completely unaware of the tension radiating from the bar area. "I need some air," I told Edith, who was watching the dance floor with the careful smile she'd worn all evening. "Don't go far," she said, her fingers briefly touching my wrist, a warning, a plea. I made my way around the perimeter of the room, avoiding the dance floor where Glenn spun Faye in dramatic circles, her laughter bright as champagne bubbles. The French doors leading to the hotel's terrace promised cool evening air and a moment of peace. I almost made it. "Well, well, look who's trying to sneak out." Glenn's voice cut through the music like a blade. I turned to see him approaching, a crystal tumbler sloshing amber liquid with each unsteady step. His bow tie hung loose, his hair disheveled from dancing, but his eyes held the cold focus of a predator who'd spotted prey. "Just getting some air," I said, keeping my voice level. "Air's overrated, Pops." He moved closer, his friends forming a loose semicircle behind him. "You know what's not overrated? Respect. Something your generation never taught you properly." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced during his threatening phone call. Other guests began to notice the confrontation, conversations quieting as heads turned in our direction. "This is your wedding day, Glenn. Let's not what?" He took another step closer, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Let's not talk about how you've been poisoning my wife against me. I haven't spoken to Faye about anything." "Liar!" The word came out slurred but vicious. "You think I don't know what you've been doing, whispering in her ear, trying to turn her against her own husband?" I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself against accusations that made no sense, when Glenn deliberately shifted his weight and extended his foot directly into my path. My toe caught his shoe. Physics took over. I stumbled forward, arms windmilling as I fought for balance that wouldn't come. The polished marble floor rushed up to meet me, and I hit hard, my shoulder taking most of the impact as I rolled slightly to protect my face. The sound of my body hitting the floor seemed to echo through the sudden silence. "Your place is at my feet, old man." Glenn's voice rang out clear and triumphant above the shocked murmurs of the wedding guests. Laughter erupted from his friends, cruel, delighted sounds that cut deeper than the physical pain radiating from my shoulder. Some other guests joined in, nervous tittering from people who weren't sure if this was part of some elaborate joke. I lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, my navy blue suit now wrinkled and stained, my dignity scattered across the marble like confetti. The taste of humiliation filled my mouth, bitter as blood. Footsteps approached rapidly, Edith's heels clicking against the marble as she rushed to help me stand. "Wallace!" Her voice carried shock and fury in equal measure. Other footsteps followed, slower and heavier, accompanied by a voice I hadn't heard in over 3 decades. The voice that cut through the wedding chaos belonged to a man I hadn't seen in over 3 decades, yet I recognized it immediately. Deep, careful, shaped by years of respect and hard work. "Sir, is that you? Mr. Marshall?" I looked up from where Edith was helping me brush marble dust from my suit jacket, my eyes finding a face lined with age but unmistakably familiar. Elmer Ortiz stood frozen in the crowd, a half-empty tumbler of whiskey forgotten in his weathered hand. "Elmer?" The name came out as a question, though I knew it was him. Thinner now, gray-haired where once he'd been dark, but the same honest eyes that had looked at me with gratitude every morning for 15 years. "Elmer Ortiz?" His face crumpled with recognition and something else, horror at seeing me on the floor of his son's wedding reception. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble with a sound that made several guests jump. "Sir, what happened? Why are you on the ground?" He pushed through the circle of onlookers, his movements urgent despite his age. "Did someone hurt you?" the crowd murmured, sensing a shift in the evening's entertainment. Glenn's friends had stopped laughing, their expressions confused as they watched this elderly man treat their victim with the deference usually reserved for royalty. "I'm fine, Elmer." I straightened my tie, trying to salvage what remained of my dignity. "Just took a little spill." But Elmer's eyes were sharp, moving from my disheveled appearance to Glenn's flushed, triumphant face. 3 decades of factory work had taught him to read situations quickly, to spot trouble before it exploded into something worse. "Dad?" Glenn's voice cracked slightly, the alcohol making his words thick. "Dad, you know this guy?" "Know him?" Elmer turned toward his son, his voice carrying an edge I remembered from the shop floor when someone had made a serious mistake. "This is Mr. Wallace Marshall, the finest man I ever worked for." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Glenn's face went through a series of changes: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally something that might have been the beginning of genuine horror. The Mr. Marshall? The one you always talked about?" "The very same." Elmer's voice grew stronger, prouder. "The man who saved our family when I made that inventory mistake. The boss who gave second chances when other people would have thrown good workers away." I watched Glenn's arrogance crumble in real time, his posture changing from victorious to something approaching devastation. His friends shifted uncomfortably, no longer sure if they were witnessing entertainment or tragedy. "Sir," Elmer continued, turning back to me with the same formal respect he'd shown every day we worked together, "I told Glenn about you, about how you treated your people, about the man I hoped he'd grow up to be." The weight of those words settled over the crowd like fog rolling in from Lake Michigan. I could see wedding guests beginning to understand that they'd witnessed something more serious than a clumsy fall, that the laughter they'd shared had come at the expense of a man who deserved better. Glenn took a stumbling step forward, his hand reaching out as if to touch me, then falling to his side. Elmer's eyes never left my face as he spoke to the gathering crowd, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent respecting the man who'd given him dignity. 1987, he said, his words cutting through the wedding music like a blade through silk. I miscounted a shipment, $3,000 worth of steel missing from the books. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the importance of whatever story was unfolding. Glenn stood frozen, his face pale as his father continued. "I was ready to be fired, had 5 kids at home, mortgage payments, medical bills for Glenn's broken arm." Elmer's voice grew thick with memory. "Thought my life was over." I remembered that day clearly, Elmer standing in my office, hat in his hands, shoulders bowed with the weight of honest mistake and desperate fear. A good man caught between honesty and survival. "But, Mr. Marshall here," Elmer gestured toward me with the same reverence he'd shown 30 years ago. "He didn't fire me. He investigated, found the shipping error, proved I was telling the truth, kept my job, kept my family fed." "Elmer, you were a good worker," I said, feeling the familiar weight of leadership settling over my shoulders despite my disheveled appearance. "Honest men deserve honest treatment." "More than that, sir." His voice cracked slightly. "You promoted me 6 months later, said you needed supervisors you could trust, changed my whole life." Glenn's friends had gone completely silent now, their earlier laughter feeling obscene in the face of this revelation. The young man who'd tripped me stood swaying slightly, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, shame, and growing horror. "This is him, Glenn." Elmer turned to his son, his voice carrying disappointment sharp enough to cut glass. "This is the man I told you about every day of your childhood, the boss who treated working people like human beings, the man I wanted you to model yourself after." I watched my son-in-law's world reshape itself in real time. The confident swagger disappeared, replaced by something that looked like a child who just realized he'd broken his mother's favorite vase. "Dad, Glenn's voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "Know what?" Elmer's tone grew sharper. "Know that decent people deserve respect, regardless of their age? Know that a man's worth isn't measured by how much he can humiliate others?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably, wedding guests beginning to understand that they'd witnessed something that transcended simple accident or practical joke. This was character assassination in reverse, a revelation of who deserved respect and who had failed to show it. Glenn took another unsteady step toward me, his expensive suit suddenly looking like costume jewelry against his father's working man dignity. "Mr. Marshall," he said, his voice breaking like a teenager's. "Sir, I have to." He stopped, looking at his father, then at me, then at the crowd of people who had watched him reveal exactly who he was when he thought he held all the power. Glenn's approach was hesitant, each step carrying the weight of recognition and shame. His wedding boutonniere hung crooked now, wilted from sweat and the heat of humiliation. "Mr. Marshall," he began, his voice stripped of all the arrogance I'd endured for months. "Sir, I owe you an apology." The crowd held its collective breath. Even the DJ had noticed the drama unfolding and lowered the music to a whisper. In the sudden quiet, my son-in-law's words carried across the ballroom like confessions in church. "I behaved like a fool, worse than a fool." He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, mixed with expensive cologne and something else, the sharp scent of genuine remorse. "I treated you with disrespect that you never deserved." I studied his face, looking for traces of the calculating predator who'd threatened me over the phone, who deliberately tripped me 20 minutes ago. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected. A man horrified by his own actions, stripped bare of pretense by his father's revelations. "What matters, Glenn, is that you make my daughter happy," I said, straightening my tie one final time. "That you treat her with the respect I failed to receive. I promise you that, sir." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "And I promise to treat you as the father you are, as the man my father raised me to respect." Elmer nodded approvingly from beside us, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of a father watching his son finally grow up. "That's the boy I tried to raise," he said quietly. From across the ballroom, I caught sight of Faye approaching, her wedding dress flowing behind her like sea foam, confusion clear on her radiant face. She'd been dancing or chatting with friends, blissfully unaware of the drama that had just reshaped her wedding reception. "Is everything all right?" she called out, her voice bright with newlywed joy. Glenn and I looked at each other, an understanding passing between us that needed no words. Some stories were better left untold, some conflicts better resolved in private. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart," I called back, accepting Glenn's offered hand in a firm shake. "Just getting to know your husband's family better." She beamed and spun away again, returning to the celebration that was, after all, meant to be about her happiness. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming as the crisis passed into memory. But Glenn didn't release my hand immediately. "The phone call," he said quietly, meant for my ears alone. "The things I said, I was drunk, angry, stupid. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," I replied. But without the edge such words might have carried an hour ago. "Your family now?" Edith appeared at my elbow, her smile cautious but genuine. "Shall we get some fresh air, dear? The terrace looks lovely." As we walked toward the French doors I'd been trying to reach when this all began, I felt Elmer's hand briefly touch my shoulder, the same gesture of respect he'd offered every evening when leaving the factory floor. Behind us, the music swelled again, and the dancing resumed. A wedding continued, as weddings should, with family learning to be family and second chances proving their worth in the most unexpected ways. The spring air carried the scent of Lake Michigan and new possibilities. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching,